Welcome back, everyone, to a new story. We really hope you enjoy it. It's funny how your life can pivot on a single, stupid mistake. Mine pivoted on the sound of shattering glass. One moment, I was Nate, a scholarship student at the city college, invisible and broke, cutting through a bad neighborhood to save a few blocks on my walk home. The next, I was a terrified animal, sprinting away from the guttural roars of three guys whose car window I'd just accidentally broken with a stray kick of a loose brick. They were gaining on me. My lungs burned, my cheap sneakers slapped against the cracked pavement, and the only thought in my head was hide. Ahead of me loomed the skeletal remains of the old Sterling Heights development, a ghost city of half-finished luxury condos abandoned after the market crash a decade ago. We called it the Labyrinth. It was a place you didn't go into unless you had no other choice. Tonight, I had no other choice. I ducked behind a crumbling concrete wall, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The shouts of my pursuers echoed through the skeletal buildings. I pushed deeper into the maze, my breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. I ran through a doorway without a door, into a cavernous, unfinished lobby. The floor was littered with debris and a thick carpet of dust. In the gloom, I didn't see the gaping hole where a grand staircase was meant to be. The world dropped out from under me. There was a sickening crack of rotting plywood, a brief weightless fall, and then an explosion of pain as I hit the concrete floor of the basement below. My left ankle twisted at an impossible angle. A scream tore from my throat, raw and sharp, before being swallowed by the suffocating darkness. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, waves of agony washing over me. I tried to push myself up, but the slightest movement sent fire shooting up my leg. I was trapped. I pulled out my phone, the screen a lonely beacon in the oppressive dark. No signal, of course. Panic, cold and suffocating, wrapped its fingers around my throat. I was going to die down here. No one would even know where to look. I was Nate, the boy from the poor side of town, the one whose absence wouldn't be noticed for days. My parents, working 2 jobs each, would just assume I was studying late at the library. The thought of them, of their tired faces, brought a fresh wave of despair. I screamed for help until my throat was raw, but my voice was just a pathetic whisper in the vast, concrete tomb. Hours passed. The pain in my ankle settled into a dull, throbbing drumbeat. The cold of the concrete seeped into my bones. I was drifting in and out of a hazy state of hopelessness when a beam of light sliced through the darkness from above. I blinked, my eyes struggling to adjust. Silhouetted in the hole I'd fallen through were 3 figures. 2 were massive, built like refrigerators in sharp black suits. The third was a woman. She descended a temporary metal ladder with an elegance that seemed utterly out of place in this ruin. She looked to be in her 50s, her silver-streaked hair styled in a severe, perfect chignon. She wore a tailored pantsuit of a deep charcoal gray, the fabric looking more expensive than everything I owned combined. Her face was a mask of cold, aristocratic beauty, her eyes sharp and intelligent as they surveyed the scene. Finally landing on me, there was no surprise in them, only assessment. "Well," she said, her voice as smooth and cool as polished marble, "it seems we have a rat in our trap." Her 2 bodyguards followed her down, their heavy boots crunching on the debris. They moved to flank me, their presence immense and threatening. I tried to scramble back, but the pain in my ankle held me fast. "Please," I croaked, my voice cracking. "I didn't mean any harm. I was just running from some guys." The woman waved a dismissive hand, silencing me. She walked a slow circle around me, her expensive heels clicking softly. "What is your name, boy?" "Nate," I whispered. "Nate Collins." She nodded, as if confirming something she already knew. "Nate Collins, no family of note, a scholarship student, practically invisible, perfect." I didn't understand. Perfect for what? She stopped in front of me and crouched down, her movements fluid and precise. Her perfume, a scent of lilies and something sharp like gin, filled the stale air. "I'm going to make you an offer, Nate. You can lie here and wait for a slow, painful death, or you can let me save you. I will have your leg tended to by the best doctors. I will give you a life of comfort and luxury you cannot even begin to imagine. You will never have to worry about money, or bullies, or the crushing weight of being a nobody ever again. Hope, fragile and desperate, flickered in my chest. What? What do you want from me? Her lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. I want you to disappear. The boy known as Nate Collins will cease to exist. In his place, a new person will be born. Or rather, reborn. She paused, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. From this day forward, you will be my daughter, Anne Sterling. The flicker of hope died, replaced by a cold, disbelieving dread. Your daughter, I'm a boy. Details, she said with another airy wave of her hand. My daughter, the real Anne, was supposed to return from her studies abroad to fulfill an arranged marriage, a tedious but necessary alliance with the Vance family. Unfortunately, she has a foolish romantic streak and decided to run off with some penniless artist. Her absence is inconvenient. It weakens my position. It invites questions I do not wish to answer. She leaned closer, her eyes boring into mine. But if my daughter were to return, looking perhaps a little different after so many years away, a daughter who is obedient and understands her duties, then my problems would be solved. You have a delicate bone structure, Nate, a certain fineness to your features that reminds me of her as a child. With a little work, you will be a convincing replacement. The absurdity of it, the sheer insanity, made my head spin. No, absolutely not. I won't do it. I'd rather die. Her smile vanished. Her face became a mask of ice. Do not be so dramatic. Death is so permanent and messy. She stood up and pulled a sleek tablet from her coat pocket. With a few taps, she turned the screen to me. It showed a live security feed of the street outside the labyrinth. The 3 thugs who had chased me were still there, pacing, angry. Those boys are waiting for you, she said calmly. They are not the forgiving sort, but they are a minor problem. She swiped the screen. A new image appeared, a photo of my parents, smiling, standing outside our tiny rundown house. Your parents, I believe it would be such a shame if they were to have a tragic accident, a gas leak, perhaps, or a break-in gone wrong. These things happen in their neighborhood. The blood drained from my face. This wasn't a request, it was a threat, delivered with the casual indifference of someone swatting a fly. The choice she was offering wasn't between life as a boy and life as a girl. It was between my life and my family's and her complete and utter control. Tears of rage, fear, and utter helplessness welled in my eyes. I looked from her cold, unyielding face to the image of my smiling parents. I was trapped in every conceivable way. My body was broken in a basement, and my spirit was about to be broken by this woman. So Nate, she said, her voice softening into a purr of false sympathy. Do we have a deal? I choked back a sob. The word came out as a strangled whisper, the sound of my old life ending and a new, terrifying one beginning. Yes. She smiled, a true smile this time, triumphant and chilling. Excellent. She turned to one of her bodyguards. Get her out of here, and be careful with her. She is my precious daughter, after all. As the massive man lifted me into his arms, the pain in my ankle was nothing compared to the agony in my soul. The woman, my new mother, looked down at me, her expression unreadable. Don't worry, little bird, she whispered, her voice a silken cage closing around me. From today on, you will be Anne, and I will take very good care of you. The journey from the derelict basement to what I would soon call the gilded cage was a blur of pain medication and disorientation. I woke up in a bedroom larger than my entire family's apartment. The sheets were silk. The air was scented with lavender, and my ankle was professionally wrapped and elevated on a plush pillow. For a moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare. Then she walked in. Isabella Sterling, the woman who now owned me, was dressed in a cream-colored cashmere robe. She held a porcelain cup of tea and looked every bit the queen in her castle. Good morning, Anne, she said, her voice crisp. Your recovery will take a few weeks. We will use that time productively. Your transformation begins today. And so it did. The first stage was what she clinically referred to as erasing the canvas. 2 maids, their faces impassive and professional, entered my room. They carried with them a small tray of toiletries, scented oils, lotions, and a humming electric razor. My protests were weak, my arguments met with a simple, unyielding stare from Isabella, who sat in an armchair, observing the process like a sculptor studying a block of marble. "A lady's skin must be smooth," she stated, as if discussing the weather. "Completely smooth." I was forced to strip. The humiliation was a physical thing. A hot flush that started at my neck and spread across my entire body. I felt exposed, less than human. As the maids went to work, the buzz of the razor was a monstrous insect against my skin. They started with my legs. I flinched as the blades moved up my calf, my thigh, leaving behind a trail of pale, shockingly bare skin. The sensation was bizarre, partly ticklish, partly irritating, and wholly violating. They were systematic, moving from my legs to my arms, my chest, even my underarms. The hair that had been a quiet marker of my masculinity was methodically mown down, leaving me feeling like a plucked chicken, a prepubescent child. When they were finished, they massaged scented oil into my now bare skin. The feeling was sickeningly pleasant. My skin, so recently my own, now felt foreign, impossibly soft, sensitive to the slightest touch of the silk sheets. I was a blank slate, stripped of my identity, ready for her to write a new one upon me. The next stage began a week later. Once I could hobble around on crutches, Isabella led me to a dressing room that was more like a boutique. Racks of clothing lined the walls, and a small pedestal stood before a three-way mirror. "We start with the foundations," she announced. On a velvet chaise lounge lay an assortment of items that made my stomach clench: a pair of delicate, lacy panties, a padded bra, a formidable-looking corset, a garter belt with dangling clasps, and a pair of sheer silk stockings. "You can't be serious," I breathed. "I am never anything but serious, Anne," she replied coolly. "A woman's shape is created, not born. This is your new anatomy." With a maid's assistance, the ordeal began. The panties were the first shock. The fabric was whisper-thin, a cool, unfamiliar caress against my skin. It felt flimsy, inadequate, and utterly wrong. Then came the bra. It was a contraption of straps and cups, filled with soft, squishy silicone pads. As the maid fastened it behind my back, the pads pressed against my chest, creating the illusion of small breasts beneath my shirt. I looked in the mirror and felt a wave of nausea. The outline was subtle, but it was undeniably female. But the corset was the true instrument of torture. It was a stiff, boned garment that wrapped around my midsection. The maid pulled the laces at the back, cinching them tighter and tighter. I gasped as the air was squeezed from my lungs. It forced my posture into an unnaturally straight line, pushing my chest out and nipping my waist in. I couldn't slouch. I could barely breathe. It was a cage of fabric and whalebone, restructuring my very frame. Finally, the stockings. The maid attached them to the garter belt. The cool metal clips a strange sensation against my thighs. The silk slid up my legs. A second skin that felt both luxurious and constricting. Every part of me was now encased in a foreign layer, shaping me, defining me, suffocating the Nate I used to be. Dressed in this bizarre foundation, I was then presented with my first dress. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple, pale yellow sundress. But as I pulled it over my head, the soft cotton fabric swirled around my bare legs. A sensation I had never experienced. It felt free, in a strange way, but also terribly exposed. I instinctively tried to sit down on the chaise lounge and nearly fell, my movements clumsy and wrong. "A lady does not plop down," Isabella's voice cut through the air. "She perches, gracefully." The final trial of the day was the shoes. They were a modest pair of navy blue heels, but the 2-inch stilettos looked like skyscrapers to me. I slipped my feet into them, and my entire body pitched forward. My weight was thrown onto the balls of my feet, my calf muscles screaming in protest. "Walk, Anne," Isabella commanded. I took one step. My ankle, still weak, wobbled precariously. I took another, and my leg buckled, sending me crashing to the carpeted floor. Humiliation burned in my cheeks. "Get up," she said, her voice devoid of sympathy. Try again. I tried again and again. Each attempt ended in a stumble or an outright fall. The corset dug into my ribs, my feet throbbed, and my spirit withered. I was a puppet with tangled strings, a doll being forced into unnatural poses. After what felt like hours, she finally dismissed me. I limped back to my room, my body aching, my mind numb. I collapsed onto the bed and caught my reflection in the wardrobe's mirrored door. I didn't see Nate Collins. I saw a stranger, a pale, slender figure with an oddly shaped torso and a bewildered expression, the soft swell of a chest, the nipped-in waist, the fall of the dress over my hips. It was a carefully constructed lie. I hated it. I hated this person in the mirror with a fierce, desperate passion. But as I stared, a tiny, treacherous thought wormed its way into my mind. I tilted my head, my reflection mimicking the movement. The line of the neck was long. The shoulders looked more delicate than I remembered. The illusion was effective, hateful, yes, humiliating, absolutely, but in a purely objective, artistic sense. The creation called Anne Sterling was strangely pretty. And that thought, more than the corset or the heels or the shame, was the most terrifying thing of all. The following weeks were a blur of relentless education. My life became a tightly controlled curriculum designed to strip away every last vestige of Nate and replace him with Anne. I had a deportment coach, a severe woman named Mrs. Gable, who spent hours forcing me to walk with a book balanced on my head. Heels, Anne, are an extension of the leg, not an enemy to be conquered. She would drone. Glide, don't stomp. I had a voice coach who worked with me on raising my pitch, softening my consonants, and adding a gentle lilt to my sentences. A lady's voice should be like music, dear, not a declaration of war. I learned how to sit, crossing my ankles just so. I learned how to stand without looking like I was waiting for a bus. I learned how to smile when I wanted to scream, a slight demure curve of the lips that never quite reached my eyes. The physical transformation continued as well. My hair, which I'd always kept short, was allowed to grow while I wore a series of expertly crafted wigs. The one chosen for my debut was a beautiful honey blonde affair that fell in soft waves past my shoulders. The feeling of hair brushing against my neck and back was a constant, distracting presence. My skincare routine became a complex ritual of cleansers, toners, and moisturizers. My hands, once calloused from odd jobs, were manicured into softness. I was being hollowed out and refilled, piece by piece. The more I looked like Anne, the less I felt like myself. Then came the day of my first real test. Kyle Vance will be joining us for dinner this evening, Isabella announced at breakfast, her tone casual, as if she were discussing the weather. It's time for you to meet your fiancé. A piece of toast turned to cardboard in my mouth. Already, I'm not ready. Nonsense, she said, not looking up from her newspaper. You've been rehearsing for weeks. This is opening night. Do not disappoint me. Panic seized me. Rehearsing in private was one thing. Performing for the man I was supposed to marry was another. What if he saw through the facade? What if my voice cracked? What if I tripped in my heels? The hours leading up to the dinner were a frenzy of preparation. I was scrubbed, polished, and painted like a porcelain doll. A makeup artist worked on my face for over an hour, using subtle shades to soften my jawline, heighten my cheekbones, and make my eyes look larger. The result was unnerving. The face staring back at me from the mirror was familiar, yet alien. It was my face, but a prettier, more feminine version of it. My outfit was a cocktail dress in a shade of seafoam green, made of a rustling taffeta that felt cool against my skin. It was sleeveless, showing off my smooth arms, and the hemline fell just to my knees. The maid slipped a pair of nude-colored 3-inch heels onto my feet. They were still uncomfortable, but my daily torture sessions with Mrs. Gable had at least made them bearable. When I descended the grand staircase, my hand trembling slightly on the polished banister, Isabella was waiting at the bottom. She gave me a long, critical look, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. A small, satisfied smile touched her lips. Acceptable, she pronounced. It was the highest praise I'd ever received from her. The doorbell rang, and my heart leaped into my throat. Kyle Vance was not what I expected. The word fiancé had conjured images of some arrogant, stuffy air, But the man who stepped into the foyer was handsome in a quiet, unassuming way. He was tall, with dark, thoughtful eyes and an easy smile. He was dressed in a well-tailored suit that spoke of effortless class. "Isabella," he said, his voice a warm baritone as he greeted my captor. Then his eyes found me, and his smile widened slightly. "And you must be Anne. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. I've heard so much." "Kyle," I managed to say, my voice a passable imitation of the soft tone I'd been practicing. "Welcome." Dinner was an exercise in pure terror. I sat across from him, hyper-aware of everything the way I held my fork, the straightness of my spine locked in place by the corset, the constant fear that my dress might ride up too high. Every question he asked sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. He was disarmingly charming. He asked about my time in Paris, and I recited the well-rehearsed script Isabella had drilled into me, tales of art history classes at the Sorbonne, walks along the Seine, and charming little patisseries. I felt like a fraud, a con artist spinning lies for this polite, seemingly decent man. "Your French must be impeccable," he said, leaning forward slightly. "I get by," I murmured, hoping he wouldn't test me on it. Throughout the meal, I felt his eyes on me. It wasn't a lecherous stare, but one of genuine curiosity. He seemed to be trying to get to know the woman he was supposed to spend his life with. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. The moment that nearly broke me came halfway through the main course. I needed salt, but the shaker was on his side of the table. "Could you pass the salt, please?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Of course," he said with a smile. As he handed it to me, his fingers brushed against mine. It was nothing, a fleeting, accidental touch, but a jolt, hot and electric, shot up my arm. It was a dizzying mix of fear and something else, something I couldn't name. It was the first time a man had touched me as Anne, the first time I had been on the receiving end of a gesture that was casual, polite, and assumed a shared intimacy. In my old life, guys would shove me or clap me on the back. They didn't gently brush my fingers. My breath hitched. I quickly pulled my hand back, my cheeks flushing. I hoped he didn't notice, but I saw a flicker of something amusement curiosity in his eyes. For the rest of the meal, I could feel the ghost of his touch on my skin. The deception felt heavier than ever. I was fooling this man, this kind man. And for what? To save a heartless woman's reputation. But as I sat there, listening to him talk, being treated with a delicate respect I'd never known, a toxic thought entered my mind. Being Nate was about being invisible, overlooked, and poor. Being Anne, for all its horror and humiliation, came with privileges. People held doors for you. Men smiled at you. You were seen, noticed, and treated like something precious. The dinner ended safely. Kyle was the perfect gentleman, thanking us for the lovely evening and telling me he looked forward to seeing me again soon. As soon as the front door closed, I felt the tension drain out of me, leaving me exhausted. "You did well," Isabella said, a rare note of approval in her voice. I didn't answer. I just turned and made my way upstairs, each step in the hated heels feeling heavier than the last. I hated the lies. I hated the dress, the wig, the person I was pretending to be. But most of all, I hated that small, treacherous part of me that hadn't entirely hated the experience, the part of me that was confused by the jolt from Kyle's touch, the part that had felt a flicker of validation under his gentle gaze. The conflict in my heart was a tangled, ugly knot. I was Nate, but I was wearing Anne's skin, and I was terrified that, sooner or later, I wouldn't be able to tell the difference anymore. Days bled into weeks, and the surreal became routine. My life as Anne Sterling settled into a rhythm that was as suffocating as it was strangely comforting. Mornings were for lessons deportment, piano, art history, all the skills a young lady of means was expected to possess. Afternoons were for fittings with stylists or quiet reading in the vast, sun-drenched library. Evenings often involved carefully orchestrated dates with Kyle, usually a quiet walk in the garden or a game of chess. The wardrobe in my room, Anne's room, was a universe of its own. It was no longer just a collection of costumes, it was my daily reality. I started my day by choosing between silk chemises and lace-trimmed panties, The act, once a source of profound humiliation, now felt as mundane as choosing a t-shirt used to. The corset was still a necessary evil, but my body had adapted to its rigid embrace. I no longer gasped for breath. I simply existed within its confines. Something inside me was shifting. The constant performance was seeping into my very being. I started to notice things I never had before. I could appreciate the luxurious feel of a cashmere sweater against my skin or the elegant drape of a silk blouse. During one fitting, a stylist presented two options for a charity luncheon: a structured sheath dress and a flowing, floral A-line. I think the A-line, I heard myself say. The color is better for a daytime event, and the cut is less severe. The stylist and even Isabella looked at me with a hint of surprise. It was the first time Anne had offered an unsolicited opinion. It was a small thing, but it felt significant. I wasn't just wearing the clothes anymore, I was inhabiting them. The physical sensations that had once been alien were now familiar. The click of my heels on the marble floors was a sound I associated with my own movement. The scent of my perfume, a light, floral fragrance called Fleur, was what I smelled when I woke up, its ghost lingering on my pillows. I even grew accustomed to the long blonde wig. I'd find myself unconsciously tucking a stray strand behind my ear or flicking it over my shoulder. These were gestures I hadn't been taught. They were simply all happening. My body was learning to be female faster than my mind could process it. The most confusing part of this internal shift was my interactions with Kyle. He was consistently kind, intelligent, and attentive. He treated me with a gentle deference that was both unnerving and deeply alluring. He never pushed, never pried, just accepted the curated version of Anne that was presented to him. Isabella, seeing that the initial introduction had gone well, decided it was time to accelerate the courtship. "The annual Sterling Foundation Gala is in 2 weeks," she announced one afternoon. "You and Kyle will open the dancing. It is tradition. He will be coming over 3 times a week to practice the waltz with you." My protest died on my lips. Arguing was pointless. The first lesson was held in the grand ballroom, a cavernous space with gleaming parquet floors and crystal chandeliers. I was wearing a simple practice skirt and dance shoes with a low, sturdy heel. My heart pounded with a familiar dread. This was too close, too intimate. Kyle arrived, looking relaxed in casual slacks and a button-down shirt. He smiled when he saw me. "Ready to let me lead you astray?" he joked. I managed a weak smile in return. "I have 2 left feet." "We'll make it work," he said. He walked toward me, and my breath caught in my throat. He extended one hand and gently placed the other on my waist. His hand was warm, a solid, reassuring pressure on the small of my back. It rested just above the rigid line of the corset, a point of living heat against the constructed artifice of my shape. My own gloved hand, as per Mrs. Gable's instruction, rested lightly on his shoulder. He enclosed my other hand in his grip firm but gentle. The proximity was overwhelming. I was close enough to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, to smell the clean, masculine scent of his cologne. The music started a slow, soaring waltz from a hidden speaker system. "Just follow me," he murmured, his voice low and close to my ear. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Our first few steps were clumsy. I was stiff, terrified of stepping on his feet or moving the wrong way. I was so focused on the mechanics of the dance that I could barely breathe. "Relax, Anne," Kyle said softly, his voice a warm rumble against my ear. "You're thinking too much. Just feel the music." He pulled me a fraction of an inch closer. My body was now flush against his, moving as one. The thin fabric of my skirt swirled around his legs. As he guided me through a turn, I felt a wave of dizziness that had nothing to do with the movement. My mind was screaming alarms. "This is a man. You are a man. This is wrong. A lie, a perversion." But my body wasn't listening. It was responding to his lead, to the rhythm of the music. It felt the strength in his arm, the sureness of his steps, and it felt a spark, a tiny, terrifying flicker of pleasure. My heart was hammering against the confines of my corset, a frantic, chaotic rhythm completely at odds with the graceful music. I didn't know what this feeling was. Was it fear of being discovered? Was it the sheer awkwardness of a straight guy being held in another man's arms? Or was it something else? Was this what it felt like to be a woman, desired and led by a man? Was Anne feeling a genuine thrill, a flutter of attraction? The thought was so repellent, so deeply disturbing, that I stumbled. Kyle steadied me instantly. "Are you all right?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "Fine," I choked out, my face burning with shame. "Just lost my footing." We continued the lesson, but my mind was a battlefield. I hated myself for the confusing warmth spreading through my chest. I was disgusted by the way my body seemed to enjoy this charade. I was Nate Collins, a guy from the wrong side of the tracks, and I was being waltzed into oblivion by my own fake fiancé. When the lesson was over, I pulled away from him as if I'd been burned. I mumbled a hasty goodbye and practically fled the ballroom. I didn't stop until I was back in the sanctuary of my room. The door locked behind me. I tore off the wig. Throwing it onto the dressing table, I stared at my reflection, at the face of a boy framed by a delicate, flushed complexion. Who was I? I was losing my grip, the lines blurring with every passing day. The mask of Anne Sterling wasn't just a mask anymore. It was grafting itself onto my skin, fusing with my bones. And I was more afraid of that than I had ever been of dying in that basement. The night of the Sterling Foundation Gala arrived like a death sentence. It was to be Anne's official introduction to the city's high society, the culmination of Isabella's meticulous planning. For me, it felt like walking the plank. The preparations began in the early afternoon. I was subjected to a team of professionals who treated my body like a precious canvas. A long scented bath, a full-body moisturizing treatment, a manicure, a pedicure. I felt less like a person and more like a luxury car being detailed before a show. The makeup artist was a true magician. She spent 2 hours on my face, creating a look that was both dramatic and elegant. Smoky eyes, defined cheekbones, and lips painted a deep, dangerous shade of crimson. When she was done, I hardly recognized the person in the mirror. The boyish angles of my face were gone, replaced by a soft, alluring femininity that was breathtaking and terrifying. Then came the gown. It was a masterpiece of haute couture, a floor-length dress of the heaviest silk in a shade of deep burgundy, the color of spilled wine. The front was deceptively modest, with a high neckline, but the back was completely bare, plunging to the small of my back in a daring V-shape. The fabric was cold and heavy against my skin, a luxurious weight that felt both regal and imprisoning. There was no room for a bra, only carefully placed adhesive cups that felt precarious and strange. The corset underneath was the tightest I'd ever worn, creating a dramatic hourglass figure that felt like a beautiful lie. Finally, the hairstylist worked her magic on the wig, sweeping the blonde tresses into an intricate, elegant updo, with a few delicate tendrils left to frame my face. She secured it with diamond-studded pins that glittered under the lights. A matching diamond necklace was clasped around my neck, its stones cold against my skin. When I stood before the full-length mirror, the transformation was complete. Nate Collins was gone. Not even a ghost of him remained. In his place stood Anne Sterling, a creature of impossible glamour and poise. She was beautiful. She was a stranger. A wave of vertigo washed over me. I was an imposter in a $1,000 shell. Kyle arrived to escort me. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, and when he saw me at the top of the stairs, he actually stopped breathing for a second. His dark eyes widened, and a look of genuine awe crossed his face. "Anna," he breathed, walking to the foot of the stairs, "you look incredible." He offered me his arm, and his touch on my bare hand sent a now familiar jolt through me. Tonight, I didn't pull away. I accepted it, playing my part. As we rode in the silent, plush interior of the limousine, I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie of someone else's life. The gala was an overwhelming assault on the senses. The ballroom was ablaze with light from a dozen chandeliers, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and floral arrangements. A string quartet played softly in the corner, and the low hum of hundreds of conversations filled the vast space. Our entrance caused a ripple in the crowd. All eyes turned to us. I could feel their gazes on me, curious, admiring, envious. Whispers followed in our wake. That's her, the sterling heiress, just back from Europe. Vance looked smitten. For the first time, I felt the intoxicating power of being Anne Sterling. It was a currency of beauty and status, and it was potent. I held my head high, my posture perfect, my smile serene. I was a doll on display, and I was playing the part of my life. After an hour of mingling and making polite, meaningless conversation, the music swelled, and the master of ceremonies announced the first dance. It was our cue. Kyle led me to the center of the vast, empty dance floor. He took me in his arms, his hold firm and confident. The warmth of his hand on my bare back sent shivers down my spine. The crowd formed a circle around us, their faces a blur beyond the lights. "Just like we practiced," Kyle whispered, his lips close to my ear. "Don't be nervous." But I wasn't nervous, not anymore. As the first notes of the waltz filled the air, something shifted inside me. I wasn't Nate, the frightened boy forced into a dress. I was Anne, the belle of the ball. I surrendered to the music, to his lead, to the role. We moved across the floor with a grace that surprised me. The hours of practice had paid off. We spun and glided, a single entity under the glittering lights. I looked up into Kyle's eyes and saw nothing but sincere adoration for this one, perfect, terrifying moment. The lie felt real. I smiled at him, a genuine, dazzling smile, and I felt him pull me a little closer in response. The dance was flawless. It was a fantasy brought to life. When the music ended, the ballroom erupted in applause. Flushed and breathless, we bowed and made our way off the floor as other couples joined in. "You were amazing," Kyle said, his eyes shining. "Let's get some air." He led me through a set of French doors onto a secluded stone balcony overlooking the manicured gardens. The cool night air was a welcome relief, a shock of reality after the heated illusion of the ballroom. We stood in silence for a moment, the sound of the party a muted thrum behind us. "Al," began, his voice suddenly serious. He turned to face me, taking both of my hands in his. "I know this whole thing, this engagement, was an arrangement made by our families, a business transaction. I went into it expecting just that." He paused, his gaze intense. "But it hasn't been like that. Getting to know you these past few weeks, you're not what I expected. You're intelligent and witty, and you have this vulnerability under all that poise. I'm not just going through the motions anymore. I've come to care for you a great deal." My blood ran cold. "No, stop, don't say it." But he did. He took a step closer, his face just inches from mine. "I'm falling in love with you, Anne." Before I could react, before I could even process the words, he gently lifted my chin with his hand. He was going to kiss me. Panic, absolute and primal, ripped through me. The illusion shattered into a million pieces. The beautiful doll cracked, and the terrified boy inside came screaming to the surface. This was not a performance. This was real. His feelings were real, and my entire existence was a lie. I flinched back as if I'd been struck. No, the word was a harsh, strangled sound, nothing like Anne's soft voice. I ripped my hands from his grasp, the beautiful gown feeling like a shroud. I saw the shock and hurt flash in his eyes, but I couldn't stop. I turned and fled. I ran from the balcony through the glittering ballroom, ignoring the startled looks from the guests. I ran past Isabella, who shot me a look of pure fury. I didn't care. I ran until I reached the grand foyer, my breath coming in painful sobs. I was a fraud. I had let this go too far. The game was over. I had fooled everyone, and in the process, I had broken the heart of a good man and possibly broken my own mind. The reflection that stared back at me from a gilded mirror was a beautiful monster of my own creation. Its face streaked with tears, its crimson lips a perfect, mocking smile. The aftermath of the gala was a storm of silent fury. Isabella didn't yell. She was far too controlled for that. Instead, she treated me with a chilling, disappointed silence that was far worse than any tirade. I spent the next 2 days confined to my room, the wine-red gown hanging on the back of my door like a bloody accusation. I refused to eat, refused to speak to the maids, refused to be Anne. I stripped off the makeup and the fine clothes and huddled in a simple silk robe, feeling the ghostly presence of Nate Collins return, weak and shaken. On the third day, I couldn't stand it anymore. The lie had become a poison, and I had to get it out. I found Isabella in her study, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound books that smelled of old paper and power. She was sitting behind a massive mahogany desk, signing documents with a fountain pen. She didn't look up when I entered. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice hoarse. It sounded more like my own voice than it had in months. She carefully blotted the ink on the page before placing her pen down. She folded her hands and finally looked at me. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of cold composure. "You embarrass me, you embarrass the family, and you deeply hurt Kyle Vance," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "He has been calling, worried sick. He thinks he did something to frighten you." "That's the point," I burst out, my voice cracking with emotion. "He's a good person. He doesn't deserve to be lied to like this. I can't keep deceiving him. I can't be her." "You were her," Isabella countered, her voice sharp as ice. "At the gala, for 2 hours, you were more Anne Sterling than my own daughter ever was. You were perfect." "It was an act," I insisted, my hands clenched into fists. "It's all an act, and it's destroying me. I want out. You got what you wanted. You stabilized your position. You showed off your returned daughter. Our deal is done. I want to go back. I want to be Nate again." I expected her to threaten me, to remind me of her power over me and my family, but she didn't. Instead, she just watched me for a long, silent moment. For the first time, I saw something flicker in her cold eyes, not pity, not sympathy, but something complex, weariness, perhaps, or maybe even a strange sort of understanding. "The plan was a temporary measure," she admitted, her voice losing some of its edge. "A way to buy time. It has succeeded beyond my wildest expectations. The alliance with the Vance family is secure. With or without an imminent wedding, you have, in fact, fulfilled your end of the bargain." She stood up and walked to the large window overlooking the gardens. "So I will give you a choice, Nate, a real one this time." She turned back to face me. "Option 1, you go back to being Nate Collins. I will deposit a sum of money into an account for you that will ensure you and your parents never have to worry about anything again. You can finish your degree, get a good job, live a normal life. Anne Sterling will simply go abroad again, to study music in Vienna. Perhaps she will fade away. You will be free. But you will lose all of this." She gestured around the opulent room. "The comfort, the status, the respect. And you will, of course, never see Kyle again." My heart gave a painful thud at his name. Freedom. It was what I'd been dreaming of. But the thought of returning to my old life, to being invisible and struggling, now seemed bleak. "And the second option?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Isabella's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You continue as Anne, not as a temporary replacement, but for good. This life," she said, her voice low and persuasive. "It could be yours, truly yours. As for Kyle, we can handle that. If you wish to end the engagement, I can arrange a delicate, mutual parting of ways that will save face for everyone. Or," she let the word hang in the air, "if you have developed feelings for him, as I suspect you have, perhaps there is a way forward. That is a bridge we can cross later. The choice is about who you want to be." She took a step closer, her gaze piercing. "I lost a daughter. Nate, my own blood was a disappointment, but these last few months, watching you, molding you, in a strange way, I feel as though I found another. You have the strength and discipline she always lacked. This role suits you better than it ever suited her." Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't just offering me a life, she was offering me an identity, an inheritance, a mother. "The choice is yours," she finished. "Decide by morning." She left me alone in the study. My mind was reeling. I wandered through the silent mansion, my bare feet cold on the marble floors. I drifted from the ballroom where I had danced with Kyle, to the dining room where his fingers had first brushed mine. Every room held a memory of Anne's life, not Nate's. I ended up in my bedroom, Standing before the massive walk-in closet, the doors were open, revealing two different worlds. On one side, tucked away in a garment bag at the very back, was the only outfit I had left from my old life, a pair of worn-out jeans, a faded college sweatshirt, and my old sneakers. They looked pathetic and alien in this temple of haute couture. They represented Nate Collins' poor, anonymous, but real. He was the truth. On the other side were racks upon racks of Anne's life. Silk blouses, cashmere sweaters, tailored trousers, and dozens of dresses in every color imaginable. There were rows of beautiful, painful heels, drawers filled with delicate lace and soft stockings, and hanging in a place of honor, still shimmering under the soft lights, was the wine-red gala gown. I reached out, my hand trembling. I touched the faded denim of Nate's jeans. The fabric was rough, familiar. It was the skin I was born in. Then, my fingers drifted across the aisle, ghosting over the cool, heavy silk of Anne's dress. It was a lie, a beautiful, intoxicating, powerful lie. This was the skin I had been given, the cage I had been forced into. But was it still a cage? Or had it, somewhere along the way, become a home? Who was I anymore? Was I the boy shivering in the basement, or the woman who had captivated a ballroom? Could I ever go back to being Nate, knowing what it felt like to be Anne, to be looked at with admiration, to be treated with tenderness, to feel the power of beauty? Did I have the courage to step out of the gilded cage and return to a reality I no longer knew if I wanted? Or had I, to my eternal shame and confusion, fallen in love with my own mask? My hand hovered in the space between the two outfits, between the two lives, between the boy I was and the woman I had become. Suspended in the impossible choice, I stood there, lost between Nate and Anne, and for the first time in my life, I had no idea who I was going to be tomorrow. The choice was mine, and it was the most terrifying freedom I had ever known.